Szanowni Państwo, zapraszam na dzisiejszy wywiad z cyklu Okiem Specjalisty z postacią nietuzinkową, z legendą amerykańskiego wywiadu, panem Williamem Binney. Pan William Binney był analitykiem i sygnalistą wywiadu Armii Stanów Zjednoczonych oraz Narodowej Agencji Bezpieczeństwa z 30-letnim stażem. W Narodowej Agencji Bezpieczeństwa pełnił funkcję dyrektora technologicznego. Był twórcą programu ThinThread, który był zdolny wychwycić każdy elektroniczny sygnał na świecie i przesyłać jego dane w czasie rzeczywistym z odpowiednim szyfrowaniem odpornym na masową inwigilację. Przez wiele lat uważany za najlepszego analityka w historii amerykańskiej Narodowej Agencji Bezpieczeństwa. Znany jest między innymi z rewelacji, jakie ujawnił, oraz swojej krytyki postępowania administracji George'a W. Busha oraz Baracka Obamy w dziedzinie masowej inwigilacji amerykańskich obywateli i nie tylko. W 2018 roku z powodu swojej analitycznej pracy demaskującej rzekomy atak hakerski Rosjan na serwery Partii Demokratycznej w Waszyngtonie spotkał się z ówczesnym dyrektorem CIA Mike'em Pompeo na wniosek samego prezydenta Donalda Trumpa w celu przedstawienia wyników swoich badań. Dramatyczna historia jego odejścia z Narodowej Agencji Bezpieczeństwa w 2001 roku została zekranizowana przez Friedricha Mossera i legendarnego Olivera Stone'a w filmie Dobry Amerykanin z 2015 roku. Legenda wywiadu, amerykański patriota, po prostu człowiek. Szanowni Państwo, zapraszam na wywiad z dobrym Amerykaninem, z Williamem Binneym. So we'll get right to it. I'll begin with a provocative question. Is the NSA listening in on our conversation, Mr. Binney?
Yes, they are. Yes.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. Oh, perfect. Okay, that's
it for future viewing.
Okay. So from what I understand, they do have that capability and they do have that sort of coverage of the world, if you will, still.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Well, so I want to begin with your thoughts on how basically the U.S. government and the world at large is dealing with the coronavirus, which is currently spreading, from former intelligence officers such as yourself and an expert in intelligence gathering matters. How do you assess the current situation?
I think it's a little bit too much fear mongering. It's not as bad as the flu epidemics we've had, so, it's killed many more people than have died so far. Sure, there's a threat, but you don't have to be over panicked by it. And that's really what's happening. They're panicking and causing basically disruption of international trade and commerce and all of that around the world. So I don't think it warrants what they're doing in terms of fear mongering.
Right. There has been a lot of speculation, and we've seen it also in the news cycle here in Eastern Europe and Poland. There's a lot of conspiracies flying around the internet that either this was engineered by some laboratory in Wuhan province. Some say that this was some sort of elaborate American scheme to basically break down China. What's your take on this basically disinformation warfare that's obviously being waged out there in the cybersphere?
Well, there are certain possibilities here you could think of, but right off the bat, my thought was, since all of these variations in the flu seem to be coming out of China, along with this coronavirus now, it seems like there must be something wrong with the Chinese chickens or something like that, that's causing them. But the other thing is either that or it's a biological program that wasn't properly controlled, or they lost control of it, or they actually there's also possible that they wanted to release it to see the effect of it. So, but also I've heard also that some of this virus was transferred from Canadian labs to China. So, it really, there's a lot of things going around, people saying a lot. I don't really know a lot of factual evidence about it yet. I think eventually we'll maybe find out. But right now, I think it's just a lot of speculation that may not warrant any concern at all.
Right. So I guess it's safe to say that anybody who's claiming that they know for sure the origin of this virus is basically, well, a shyster, so to say. Right. Okay. Definitely. Right from William Binney's mouth. Thank you very much. Mr. Binney, a few days ago, there were reports circulating in the United States that apparently the Russian government is planning to, quote unquote, intervene again in the American presidential elections, which are due in November of this year. You're very well known in many former intelligence circles in the States on your work on so-called Russiagate, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I just want to get your take as an American and former professional intelligence analyst about the sort of hysteria whereby anything that is not in accordance with the mainstream narrative in the United States can easily be dumped on the Russians. Where is this Cold War fever coming from in the United States?
Actually, I called it the third swindle of the public of the United States, and actually it eventually goes into the world. The first swindle was you had to give up privacy for security. That's why then went to bulk acquisition of data on everybody in the planet. And the second swindle was cybersecurity. They said, the Vault 7 listed hundreds of millions of lines of source code, which meant tens of thousands of different attacks that were available already and known by the United States government at CIA and NSA and GCHQ too, where they could penetrate firewalls, operating systems, networks, servers, switches, everything around the world. Well, they knew all these weaknesses existed, but never fixed them. And so therefore, we were all sitting here using those things, the firewalls and servers and everything, right, thinking we were safe or had some security. But in fact, we were vulnerable all over the place to individuals as well as countries and whatever. But then when we get attacked, and there's some compromise of a system like OPM or other kinds of the Office of Personnel Management in the United States or other kinds of companies getting attacked, they keep saying we need more money for cybersecurity. Well, the point is they already aren't giving us, they're making us all, are letting us all stay vulnerable. Right. And this is simply a swindle. If you fix the problems you know about, then maybe we'll have some cybersecurity. And then, if you got attacked, then you could ask for money. But right now, the third swindle is on the Russia hoax again. It's a matter of creating a new Cold War where they can swindle us out of trillions. So that's the third swindle. In the first place, I've never seen any evidence from the United States agencies, intelligence agencies, or anybody else that could show that the Russians interfered in any way with the elections in 2016. So, this is just a regurgitation of the lies they were perpetuating after the 2016 election.
Right. So it begs a fundamental question, I think, on a global scale. Why is it so important, therefore, to debunk what happened or didn't happen in 2016? Because we're being fed a lot of information. A lot of it is basically BS. But for the typical viewer of CNN, possibly Fox News, MSNBC, or any media outlet for that matter in the world, it's very hard to decipher. And in order to reach specialists like you, well, you have to know that, for example, there exists such a website as Consortium News, for example. So again, why is talking about Russiagate, the origins of Russiagate, and even if there was a Russiagate, so important from the point of view of the public interest?
Well, it's because it's really the truth, and in order to have an informed public, you have to tell them the truth so they can make an informed decision. I mean, otherwise, if you're getting what it is population control. This is what I call this entire process from the beginning. It's an attempt to do population control, and that's what I testified at the Bundestag and also to the House of Lords in the UK, and also over here in the US, because the whole idea is if you can keep. I would put it this way. Casey, the former director of CIA, back in, I think it was 1981, said, and this was heard by some people who were part of VIPS, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals of Sanity. He said that they were infiltrating and had been infiltrating the mainstream media for decades. And you'll know that they've succeeded once most of everything that's believed is false. So that means they're in the background pushing the narrative, and the mainstream media is just regurgitating that narrative without challenging anything, without asking, any serious questions at all about what our government's really doing, as opposed to what they say they're doing. So, So, I mean, you know,
I was going to say 1984 on steroids in a way.
yeah.
Getting into the technical nitty-gritty of Russiagate, so to say, one of the most important analyses that you have produced was the one pertaining to the question, was it really WikiLeaks or the Russian government that stole those famous emails from the Democratic National Committee? Or were they, oops, I think it's the NSA, sorry about that. What was it, the Russians who stole those famous emails on Hillary Clinton? Or was it basically downloaded and passed on to Julian Assange? And I was wondering if you can elaborate in as layman terms as you can, why you believe that the Russians did not hack the DNC.
Well, that's pretty straightforward. All the 35,813 emails that the WikiLeaks posted from the DNC all had the property of the FAT file format, which file allocation table, which meant it was read to a storage device like a thumb drive or a CD-ROM, then physically transported before WikiLeaks could post it. And so it's clear it was done basically to a locally with a thumb drive.
Right. So it's as simple as that, and yet we know that I think it was in 2017, President Trump actually asked the then director of the CIA to meet with you, Mike Pompeo, to discuss this information. And I'm not sure how much you can disclose. It's a matter of some confidentiality for sure. But I'm wondering, did you, at least from your vantage point, notice that the CIA or NSA or anybody after that conversation with you took any action in this regard? Any corrective action?
No, they didn't. As a matter of fact, they did not. Because, in fact, I basically told Director Pompeo at the time that his agency and that all the other IC agencies were lying to him and the president, because they should have known what was going on. It's very simple to do. It's not a complicated thing to see.
Now, do you believe it was in a way deliberate on the part of Pompeo, or was he actually really uninformed as to the facts, and he found them so amazing coming from you that he just didn't want to believe them?
Well, I think he was playing the bureaucrat. He was the head of the agency, stood up for his agency, that's all.
Okay, I understand. So being the... Right, okay. I wanted to discuss, Mr. Binney, the issue of NSA spying on potential American allies. We know about the affair with the NSA during Obama's term, listening into the conversation of Angela Merkel, for example. And I was wondering, from your perspective, how likely is it, might be a rhetorical question, that the NSA is spying on another American ally more to the east, Poland? And what kind of information would the agency gather on a potential NATO ally who seems to be firmly in the American camp, but nonetheless the spying is taking place?
Well, first of all, I think you should realize that every country in the world spies on every other country. So the Israelis spy on us, we spy on them. You know, the B&D spies on us, we spy on them. Everybody spies on everybody. So, and the question is just to gain knowledge of background of whatever their allies are saying, and what they're thinking, so they can try to fit into a consolidated process or a consolidated position for all of the allies together. So it's not necessarily to disrupt or in any way interfere with it. It's just to understand the position that their allies are saying and why they're saying it. Right. So, but there is another aspect of it that hasn't really come out too much, and it's really a lot of NSA's activity, including the databases and management of the databases, has been transferred to contractors. Now, the problem with that is contractors of any given business have many divisions of different efforts going on in their company, the overall company. They may make airplanes and also be in spying, you know, or make ships and also be in spying, or have other kinds of manufacturing efforts. Now, the problem is that when you have also a division of your company looking at the entire database collected by NSA, which is everything on the web, that opens up the danger and opportunity for those companies to do industrial espionage, directly,
Right.
using their own people inside the NSA working on the maintaining their databases and data. So, I mean, that's certainly a given hazard here. And I don't know that a lot has been being done to prevent that from happening.
Right.
We had a program in the thin thread program we were building in the 1990s, which was automatically auditing who came into our network and where they went and what they did. So if we had that program running, we could tell if anybody in any contractor was involved in any kind of espionage, industrial espionage against anybody in the world. So we could have done that. So that was one of the things they removed from our program, because they didn't want anybody to know what they were doing with the data. Because
I see.
you see, we had three components in the thin thread program. One was to do the filtering up front, where we only pulled out related material based on human behavior with deductive, inductive, and abductive logic. So we only pulled out data that was relevant for the analyst to look at for problems they were supposed to be addressing. So in other words, everybody else in the world had privacy there because we simply let their data go right by, which meant, for us, that was the way to do it, because now you created a rich environment for your analysts to actually succeed at detecting threats in advance and being able to at least alert so that we could maybe stop them. But that was one of the first things they removed, because in order to make that assessment, to pull the data, you had to first be able to see it, be able to look at it. So that meant once they removed that filter, everything came in. So then the second thing that they removed was the encryption of the attributes of people so that you couldn't tell who they were if they were brought in. So that meant then when they removed that meant that not only did they bring all the data in from removing the filtering, but also they knew who was involved in all of it, because they didn't have any protections on identities in the data. And then the final thing was to remove the auditing program, because then no one, whatever they did with the data, no one would be able to tell. So those were the three things they did to get at the thin thread program to actually start spying on the entire world.
So basically the principle of, and we hear it very often, especially in the media of countries that seem to be sometimes overly pro-American, is that allies don't spy on allies. Well, as I said, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it straight from William Binney himself. That's not the way the world works. So in terms of cyber espionage, I mean, we know the capabilities of the NSA. I mean, Snowden made it worldwide knowledge to everyone. But if we look at other countries, for example, who would you rate as the next 2 or 3, honchos in terms of cyber warfare and cybersecurity? For example, in reference to which the United States would need to pay particular attention to, for example.
Okay. Yeah. Well, in my estimate would be the outside of the Five Eyes. The next one would be China.
Okay.
And then after that, probably something like the B&D, or also the Israelis, and then perhaps somewhere along in there, the Indians would come in, Indians, and then somewhere around there, I think it'd be Russia, something like that. I think the main threat, other than outside the Five Eyes, is China.
Well, it would seem the mainstream media doesn't agree with you in the United States, because, I mean, Russia is made out to be, the super boogeyman in terms of cybersecurity. But here, if I counted rightly, they were like number 5 on the list. So that gets you thinking. Can we list any examples as of recent history of any major victories on the Chinese cybersecurity front against the United States? Any concrete examples?
Yes, I think the OPM case, the Office of Personnel Management, that leak was traced back to Chinese sources, or sources that were owned by China, that is servers and so on. So, and before that, I mean, 6 years before that, they caught a hack from China that they traced back to a military building in Shanghai, and they say it came from this building in Shanghai. So and they're in thieving, all kinds of intellectual capital all over the world, not just in the U.S. but around Europe too. So I think they're probably the biggest hackers in the world in terms of industrial espionage. So I think the Russians are not really close to them, in my view.
Right, despite the good services of Kaspersky in general. Despite, exactly. What about the little guys? Because if you look at it in terms of in what form, for example, North Korea or Iran could lash out at the United States, other than threatening them with conventional military terms on some short-range basis. But we know that Iran, for example, has a huge cybersecurity capability. Why do you think Iran invested so much in its cyber potential?
Well, I think that's certainly the warfare of the future is going to be there. And of course, it's a way of getting back at any country in the world without actually having to invade them, right? It's a way of causing damage without really actually physically having to be there. Mm-hmm. So it's a way that makes it possible for them to at least threaten countries. But I would also point out that some of the things we did, like we were involved with, indirectly or directly, I guess, I don't know for sure, with the Stuxnet virus that was implanted in the Iranian cyclotrons there. So that causing them to spin and burn out was kind of a sophisticated virus, but once that is out, it's out. And like any other attack, if it's on the web, where people know about it, and then it circulates around the world, and it's no longer could be attributed to any one country having it. So, and also what that also means is they could look at it, analyze it, and reverse engineer it, also modify it.
Right.
And that means it gets really dangerous too. So I think one of the I can't remember the name of the virus that was attacking hospitals in Europe and in England and so on a year or two ago. That was, I think, traced back to a modification of one of the programs in the Vault 7 material. So, and the point is, once this kind of information is out there, like all that attacks on from Vault 7 and everything, then the world has. Now, who's going to be? This is the thing I brought up here in this country. Is the only way you're going to really be able to tell if somebody who hacked your service or whatever it is, your server or your cloud, the only way you're going to be able to tell who it is to trace the packets going back to them. If you don't have that trace, it could be anybody in the world.
Right. And that brings me to a sort of local question, because here in Poland, we pride ourselves, or at least our government prides ourselves, that we're one of the very few NATO allies that actually contributes 2% of its GDP towards NATO. Now, it begs the question, in terms of what we're discussing in a world full of, cyber threats, whether maybe half of that money should not be geared towards building up Poland's cybersecurity infrastructure, which, from what I know, and I do have some frequent contacts with members of parliament, politicians and commentators, are still lagging behind. So I'm just curious what Bill Binney, for example, would advise the Polish government in terms of, first, our geopolitical situation and who we're surrounded by, and how that relates to proper investment into cybersecurity.
Well, I think cybersecurity is a key component of every country's business. I mean, they need to be in that business. One of the things I keep pointing out is that I think is an important thing to do is do or use programs like TraceWatch and TraceRoute. TraceWatch is like putting a set of programs on your system will tell you who's coming into your system. And I thought cybersecurity could be as simple as being able to detect an intruder. Right. So if you can detect an intruder, you can simply assume it's an attack and route them to the corner to try to figure out what the attack is, if you want to do that. Otherwise, you can just block them at that point from getting into your system. That does require that you have fairly good documentation of your system, so you know the numbers of terminals, the wires, and where they're connected, and all of that. So you need to have good documentation to be able to make that kind of thing effective. But if you have it, I mean, there's no reason you can't stop any attack from any country in the world.
Right. So
And then,
it's no, right, go ahead.
and then I was going to say, then the other thing would be use things like trace route, where if you do get an attack and it's successful, you capture the packets and you can see the routing of the packets back through the network. Because if anybody's attacking you, they need to have if they're after data, they need to have the data come back to them through the network. So that means they've got the routing. They have to have their routing information with every packet, otherwise it won't get there. So at that point, you can trace the attacker basically.
Right.
And that's what NSA has put around hundreds of trace route packets around the networks in Europe and around the world, so that they can trace the packets. That was one of the things they were, according to the Snowden material, one of the ways they were trying to deal with the Tor network.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to trace the packets so they could reconstruct the pathways for all of the communications.
Right. Well, since you mentioned Snowden, I have to ask, what is your assessment of what Edward Snowden did and the legacy of his action at NSA and after NSA?
Well, I think I always refer to an executive order here that not many people are paying attention to. It's the one that governs all classification by the United States government. And it's Executive Order 13526. You can look this up on the web. It's out there, posted. And section 1.7 says you cannot classify any information that is evidence of a crime, fraud, waste, abuse, or any kind of corruption. And there's a few other things that are classified in that section, but a good deal of what Edward Snowden was showing and exposing was evidence of a crime. Specifically, I mean, at least against the United States, citizens of the United States. I mean, that's clearly a crime there. So none of that should have been classified. It said you must declassify it. Those are the regulations. And so for the most part, I think there's some things he shouldn't have done or released. Sometimes some things that the reporters who had the data shouldn't have published. Right. But for the most part, they were publishing things that were evidence of crimes. And those, I think for doing that, that's a public service. And I think he's, I would classify him as a public hero, if you will, someone who has done the public an extreme amount of good. Right.
So I'm guessing the same assessment would apply to Julian Assange?
Absolutely. I mean, he's telling a lot of truths about countries around the world committing all kinds of crimes. So yeah, and it seems that the people who are telling the truth are the exception in the mainstream media. For certain, that's true. Mainstream media wouldn't touch these things. So it's pretty clear that Julian Assange and others like Edward Snowden are probably the only ones that are going to tell us the truth.
Right. So in a weird twist of fate, you guys are the bad guys now, basically.
I refer to it as the evil empire.
The evil empire, I like that. It's got a Reagan-esque and Star Wars tone to it, exactly. You almost want to salute there. In light of...
It was Dick Cheney who said we had to go to the dark side.
Yep, in that creepy Cheney voice of his. Yes, indeed. We're going to work the dark side.
Cheney.
Darth Cheney, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's no wonder that Christian Bale thanks Satan for the talent that he had to use to play Cheney in that movie from last year, Vice. Mr. Binney, I'm wondering then, in light of the abuses that we know that have taken place and committed by some elements of the American intelligence community, and there's a lot of talk about this, especially in the last 3 years, talking about dirty cops and dirty intelligence agencies and how to try to frame President Trump. If you had to make a decision, for example, would you reform or abolish the CIA and the NSA?
And the FBI.
And the FBI, yes.
And the Department of Justice.
Okay, that's a long list.
And the Department of Homeland Security.
Right. Let's throw the Department of Education there also.
That's right. Them too. Yeah.
Right.
I think the entire system needs some major revisions.
Right.
Especially in how they do checks and balances and accountability. They have basically no accountability for anything they do, right? And there's no way of anybody in government to know what the other parts of government are doing. In fact, there's no country in the world that really knows what their intelligence agencies are doing. None of them. They don't really know what's happening there. Take, for example, the Bundestag investigating the BND. They found out that they were actually cooperating with NSA, collecting data on German citizens and giving it to the NSA to store. And that's in violation of their constitution and their rights. So it's the same all over the world. I mean, even when the House of Lords was meeting and I testified there, I basically brought it up that the lawyers at GCHQ were telling the members of Parliament that they couldn't separate out all of their communications from the bulk acquisition of data that they were doing because there's just too much data there to do that.
Right.
Well, I basically said that was horseshit, because even the Naris devices, which were commercially available as early as 2001, 2002, were quite capable of separating out anybody's communications from any of the mass things that they were looking at. Even the Naris Insight device, which looked at 10 gigabit lines, rather large pipe. Handle, you've seen I guess the pictures of them where they have a big pipe with about 64 fibers coming out. It'll take everything on that line, everything, and separate anything out you want. All you have to do is tell it. So that's been basically a lie from the beginning. But that's what these intelligence agencies do. They lie to their governments even. So, and that's why you can't trust them. When they close the secret door, you don't really know what they're doing.
Right. Mr. Binney, a question that I think is very relevant, especially in terms of those who have watched that great documentary, The Good American. But I think it needs to be elaborated. The fact that, in your opinion, if ThinThread was not shut down officially in August 2001, do you believe that within that 3-week window between that August meeting with Maureen Baginski and 9/11, ThinThread would have gathered enough information to have actually stopped the terrorists from doing what they did?
Yeah, it would have picked them out when they were moving to the airports and using the same credit cards to buy the airplane tickets, and convergence to the airports would have been a clue. Where they were all collecting at different airports to take off from the airplane. So, plus it would have picked up, I think the date and the date of the attack was given in symbols in an email. Would have picked that out too. And it would have, I think, gotten anything else that they were doing, any kind of communication they had, like when before the attack, they called back home and they also transferred money back just before the attack so that they didn't waste money for the terrorist effort, So all that stuff would have been picked up, yeah. And it was a clear-cut case of knowing that that's the standard practice of military formations. Before they attack, they move to the takeoff points for the offensive. That's what they terrorists did too.
Right. That's go ahead.
I mean, there's in my mind, there's no question. Not only would it have been alerting on that 9/11, but every terrorist attack before 9/11 and everyone afterward too.
That's fascinating. It's fascinating and tragic at the same time. I can imagine we sort of got a glimpse of that while watching the movie, what you must have felt on 9/11. Heart-wrenching for sure.
I watched it happening and I just thought we just outright failed.
Right.
It was just outright failure.
If we look at how the deep state functions within the Russiagate narrative, how do we reconstruct? And I know you're great at data reconstruction and seeing patterns. In your opinion, what was the entire operation framing Trump really about? What were they afraid of?
Well, I think I said that. I was on Lou Dobbs' show on Fox News in February of 2016 or 2017, right after the inauguration of President Trump. And all the political people from the left and the right, Republicans and Democrats, were all attacking him, even before he got into office.
Right.
And I basically said, fundamentally, the problem with them is they're so afraid of this man coming out, Trump, the new president, who is not affiliated with any real party, really. I mean, he picked the Republican Party to run on, but he wasn't really a longstanding Republican, and he didn't owe anybody any political favors, and he didn't owe anybody any money. He didn't need any money, so he wasn't bribable in that sense. And he was a businessman who liked to get things done. So that posed a real big threat to all these politicians, because if he came in and started achieving things and doing things much more effectively and better than the politicians have ever done, then they're all going to look like crap. And that's exactly what he did. And that's exactly why they were afraid of him, because they had no control over him. They couldn't stop him from doing things. And they basically were afraid he was going to make them look like little do-nothings, and he has. That's the point.
Right. I thought it was symbolic that I think on the second day after the inauguration, one of the first places that he visited was Langley. He went to the CIA. He gave them a speech. I sort of interpreted as I'm here. I'm the new boss, and whether you like it or not, the fact is a fact. I don't know if you got the same impression watching that speech at Langley.
Well, no, I think he was basically putting everybody on notice, yeah.
Right.
Because he also basically was fundamentally questioning what the intelligence community was doing. And of course, it's now coming to light what they were doing. They were framing him. They were trying to do a coup and all of that. And, supposedly our new Attorney General Barr and his investigator Durham, the prosecutor Durham, is looking into all of this, and they're going to indict people, supposedly. They better. If they don't, we still don't have a democracy or a republic in all of our fundamental rights under the Constitution are basically null and void.
Right. And one final question for today: are you seeing any signals, magic word, signals intelligence coming to you from open sources and maybe sources that you can't discuss about anything that could be of the magnitude of 2016 being prepared against Trump in this election cycle?
No, I haven't actually seen anything, although there's some things they're talking about, like the Russia's going to do it again, that kind of setup. It could be a part of that prepared setup to revisit that again, but it's just another continuation of that lie they started and manufactured, and they were a part of the manufacturing. The FBI was a part of it, CIA was a part of it, so was the Department of State and Department of Justice. All of these organizations that are supposed to be working for the betterment of the country weren't doing that. They were working to basically subvert the entire Constitution. I called it sedition, and in many cases treason against the founding principle of our nation. That's my view of it.
Well, that's a lot of people that are going to have to go to the gallows, Mr. Binney. But if that's what has to happen, that's what has to happen for the glory of the Republic.
I just say you do the crime, you pay the time.
You do the crime, you do the time, exactly. Or as Tony Soprano would say, it is what it is. Indeed. Mr. Binney, thank you so much. That was a fantastic interview.